Hello Year 12, it's Mr. Amitabha here with another video about Buddhism. This is our last lesson before we come back into school, and it's also our last lesson on Buddhism because we're going to move on to the philosophy section of the course when we come back. This lesson, we've been through all the units on Buddhism. We're just going back to something that we looked at right at the beginning of the course, or near the beginning of the course, about the Buddha's life story, and we are going to look at how we can structure an essay to do about the Buddha's life story. The reason we didn't do these essays back then, or look at these essays back then, was because I thought it was useful to have gone through some other stuff about Buddhism before we come back and look at how you might write essays about the Buddha's life. So basically, there's a worksheet for the first bit of the lesson that I'm going to talk you through. So I just want you to have that worksheet in front of you and then complete it as I talk through. And then I'm going to talk about the structure of how you might answer an exam question. I want you to kind of write up write up that structure, just that you have the outline of a plan of an essay about the life of the Buddha. The important thing to remember when it comes to questions about the life of the Buddha is the main importance for Buddhists for the story of the life of the Buddha is its importance as a teaching aid. So the idea is supposed to be that the life of the Buddha is not of importance, purely on its own, as that this is what happened to the life of our leader. Its importance mainly lies in its the use it can be put to as a teaching aid. So we're going to be exploring what different messages you can find in different stories from the Buddha's life. And we've already done this to a large extent, so you'll have notes on this already. Okay. So look, this is a question here. What part of the Buddha's life biography is the most important? Now, that's an unlikely question to come up. I don't think it should come up as an exam question, but it's perhaps a useful thing to think about just to help us think critically about the Buddha's life story. So look, for each part of the Buddha's life story, I've got 5 parts of his life story here. I've put what happened. We should already know that. Arguments for its importance, and in most cases, maybe all cases, I'll be talking about why is it, what lessons does it teach Buddhists? How does it teach them about Buddhism? And then arguments against its importance in the third one, which we haven't looked at yet. So the first 2 parts of this, you've already got a worksheet which virtually has this stuff on, I think. So you might want to have that in front of you to help you fill this in. Okay, let's go through each one. Okay, what happened at the Buddha's birth? Well, a few important things. There was a miraculous birth. So that is that he was born without causing his mother pain. He's actually, according to some accounts, supposed to have come out of his mother's side in a kind of miraculous way. Then when he was born, he could walk. He walked 7 steps and he spoke, declaring this would be his last rebirth. Then a bit later on, a fortune teller comes to see him, and he has these marks on his body, these 32 marks, which are supposed to indicate that he will either become a great political leader, like a king, or that he will become a great religious leader. And his father wants him to become the political leader, and that's why his father decides to make him live in give him a life of luxury to live in, where he never sees any bad stuff. The idea being that he won't he'll be so attached to his life of luxury that he won't want to go off and become a religious leader. Why is it important? Well, what does this teach Buddhists? Well, it's really teaching about karma, I think, is the most important thing here, because basically the Buddha's miraculous powers on his birth, and also the fact that he's born with these 32 marks, are all due to the fact that he's created so much karmic merit from his previous lives, from all the good deeds he's done in the past. So that's why these stories are important. They're kind of a witness to the importance of karma in Buddhist lives. How could you say it's not important? Well, couple of ways. One, you could, from a secular Buddhist point of view, say doubt the veracity of this stuff and say, did this stuff really happen? Is it really possible? Even if we think that miraculous things are possible, it does seem odd that he walked 7 steps and spoke, and then he went back to being a normal baby, and no one seemed to really mention it after that. So it seems a bit unrealistic. So from a secularist Buddhist point of view, we could say it's doubtful that it's true. We could also say from a secular Buddhist point that, they would argue that we shouldn't be focusing on teachings like karma and rebirth. Building up merit is not an important thing in Buddhism. They should be focusing on overcoming suffering, not on merit. So that would be arguments against from a secular Buddhist point of view. Okay, the four sights. What happened? Well, yes, the Buddha wanted to see the world outside the palace, so he got his charioteer to take him to see outside the palace, and he went on 4 journeys. First time he sees a old person, which he's never seen before. The second time he sees a sick person he's never seen before. And the third time he sees a dead person, he's never seen that before. And he becomes aware for the first time that life is full of suffering and that this suffering will happen to him one day. And then on the fourth journey, he sees a wandering holy man looking for the truth, and that gives him a sign of hope of what he should do in the future. Why is it important? Obviously, this is important because it teaches dukkha. It teaches the Buddhist teaching that the world is full of suffering for all people. But it also teaches the idea of renunciation and the idea that in Buddhism, the most important, the best way to escape from suffering is to become a monk, to renounce the world. Arguments against its importance. Well, first of all, you could talk about it being unrealistic, and therefore, can it be true? Or even that its unrealistic nature means that it's difficult for people in the modern world to believe in. Maybe you might say, look, we just can't believe in this story, and that maybe makes it lose its impact as a teaching device. If you say, this Buddha, he didn't realize people were old, sick, and dead. Didn't realize that happened when he was like in his late 20s or 30s, whatever. People might find it just unrealistic and therefore not useful as a story in the modern world. I think those would be the main ones. I suppose some people, like from a secular Buddhist point of view, might say, it kind of implies that you had to get over suffering, you have to become a monk, you have to renounce the world. But they would argue that you don't have to. And in fact, in the Buddha's lifetime, people became enlightened even when they weren't monks and nuns. So maybe it's misleading because it makes you think you have to become a wandering holy man. Okay, next one. Meditation and asceticism. So when the Buddha, so we'll divide these into 2, I guess, meditation and asceticism. When the Buddha first tries to get enlightened, when he's left the palace, he becomes a wandering holy man. I should have said another problem with the importance of the 4 sights, you might say, is that it's got a dubious moral message, because the 4th sight, becoming a wandering holy man, influences the Buddha to leave his wife and family and just go off on his own without them, become a wandering holy man. So you could say that there's some morally dubious part of the story, that in other words the Buddha renounces the life of his family and leaves his family to fend on their own just for his own, so that he can find enlightenment. So meditation, what happens? So the Buddha practices under 2 meditation teachers. I can't remember their names, to be honest. I can't remember, but you can find them. You've got them in your notes. And he practices these 2 forms of meditation and becomes very, very skilled at them. So skilled, in fact, that they both ask him to become the joint teacher of their group along with them. But the Buddha says that even though he's so good at meditation, he hasn't found the truth. So he goes off and leaves. Let's just go for the importance of the meditation stuff first. So for some people, this might be used to indicate some stuff about meditation, particularly the idea that although meditation is important in Buddhism, not all forms of meditation lead to enlightenment. And for some people, this is taken to teach that samatha forms of meditation do not get you to enlightenment, whereas vipassana forms of meditation do get to enlightenment. So that might be one reason for its importance. In the arguments against its importance, you could argue that the problem with that, the view that this view that the meditation teachers that the Buddha had were teaching samatha, and therefore samatha is inferior to vipassana, you could argue that there's a problem with that, because actually it could be said that focusing on that idea to do with the life story leads to a misleading conclusion. Because we've seen, actually, from when we looked at meditation, the first bit, that that idea that samatha doesn't lead to enlightenment, only vipassana does, is not actually found in the Pali Canon. That idea that there's this complete distinction between samatha and vipassana, and samatha being kind of inferior, is not in the Pali Canon. So you could say that by focusing on that bit of the story, you could end up with a misleading idea about Buddhist meditation. So that would be the criticism there. Asceticism, what happens? So after he leaves the meditation teachers, the Buddha joins up with this group of 5 people who think that the way to reach enlightenment is by self-mortification or asceticism. So that's basically by treating the body poorly or torturing the body in various ways. And the idea is that that will somehow release the soul or bring you freedom or something like that. Now so the way he does it, of course, is by starving himself. You know, sometimes you get this idea he lived on like 1 sesame seed a day and all stuff like this. And then, of course, he found that it didn't work. He was just making himself suffer more. So he gives it up. Why is it important? Well, mainly it's important because it's to do with the teaching of the middle way. In conjunction with his early life, the idea is that neither a life of luxury nor a life of harsh asceticism is going to bring you to enlightenment, and so Buddhists should follow a middle way where they don't indulge in their cravings, but they don't harm themselves either. Why can we say asceticism's not important? It's difficult to say, really, because I think that story is quite important. It is quite an important lesson for Buddhists. I suppose you could say, along with meditation, that the asceticism part of the story just doesn't what's the word? The asceticism part of the story is only telling you what Buddhists shouldn't do. It doesn't really tell you what Buddhists should do, how they should live their life. The meditation of asceticism is just like a blind alley, went down the wrong route. So it's not that important. You could also argue, I suppose, the asceticism story is unrealistic. It's you know, how can anyone live on 1 sesame seed a day? So by overstating what really happened, you could say Buddhism has ended up making an unrealistic story which people in the modern world are unlikely to believe in. Okay, enlightenment, what happened? So the Buddha sits down at the foot of this tree, the Bodhi tree, and says that he's just going to sit there and meditate until he gets enlightened. He is challenged while he's meditating by Mara, the kind of demon figure, and Mara kind of tries to stop the Buddha reaching enlightenment in 3 ways. 1, he sends his daughters to tempt the Buddha, but the Buddha's not tempted. Then he sends an army to attack the Buddha, but the army can't harm the Buddha. And when they send their arrows to shoot at the Buddha, they turn into flowers and fall down at the Buddha's feet and stuff. And then thirdly, the Mara then Mara then asks the Buddha, challenges the Buddha, what right he has to get enlightened, like what makes him think he's got the right to get enlightened. And the Buddha touches the earth, and the earth gives witness. And in some versions of the story, like a goddess of the earth springs up and says that the earth was there, she was there through all his previous rebirths, and that can show that, and that shows that he's built up all this karma, he's done all these great deeds, meaning that he is worthy of reaching enlightenment. And so after that, when Mara is defeated, then the Buddha reaches enlightenment in 3 stages. So the first thing is he sees all his own previous rebirths and how they were linked to karma. Then he sees the rebirths linked to karma of every other human being in the world, and then he sees the truth of the Four Noble Truths, and he reaches enlightenment. Why is it important? Lots of different things you could say. You could talk about Mara and the fact that Mara is a symbol of certain things in Buddhism, particularly the idea that to get to enlightenment, you need to overcome craving, represented by the daughters, and you need to overcome hatred, represented by the army. So from that point of view, those parts of the story could be seen as symbolic representations of things that are going on within the Buddha's mind. Why else could it be important? Because it could be linked to the teaching of rebirth. You could say, well, the reason Buddhists believe in rebirth is because the Buddha directly saw the teaching of rebirth. That's quite an interesting one. When we look back to what we saw about Stephen Batchelor, was, said that the Buddha might have only believed in rebirth because other religions around his time did, but according to the Buddhist tradition, that's not true. The Buddha actually saw his own rebirths and everyone else's rebirths directly. One more reason why it might be important. So the other reason why it might be important would be the teaching of Vanata. We looked at a quote. I don't have that quote with me right now, but where the Buddha says, "O house builder, you are seen. Your ridgepole is shattered. No more will you build this house." That is supposed to be a reference in the Enlightenment story to the fact that when the Buddha was enlightened, he saw the truth of anatta, and because he saw that there was no self, then that meant that he wouldn't be reborn as a person in his next life. Arguments against its importance. I guess from a secular Buddhist point of view, you could say that the story of Mara is unrealistic and therefore a distraction for Buddhists. You might also say that there's a bit of a confused message for people, maybe in the story, the part of the story where the Buddha touches the earth and the earth bears witness to the fact that he's worthy of enlightenment. Because Buddhism is supposed to be a religion where often said to be a religion where you can reach the highest goal. Enlightenment is not just supposed to be the goal for special people, but for everyone. Everyone should try to reach it. But in saying that the Buddha touched the earth and the earth said, yes, he's worthy of enlightenment because of all these millions of brilliant past rebirths, that suddenly seems to make it sound as if enlightenment's only the goal for some people and not for all people. So there's a problem. There could be a problem there. You could argue from like a Pure Land Buddhist point of view that this part of the story is irrelevant because today it's not possible to get to enlightenment through our own efforts. So there's no point in focusing on this part of the story. So there's lots of different things you could say. Okay, what happened at the Buddha's death? There are two things that are really important. Number one, the Buddha gave instructions of what to happen to his remains, and his remains were divided up. Well, he was cremated, and then his remains are divided up. His like ashes and the bones and things are divided up, and they are placed in stupas. This is based on the Buddha's instructions, and the stupas are in different parts of India. And the idea is that he recommends that lay people could come and worship those stupas and pay respect. So he does kind of recommend the worshipping of his remains, particularly for lay people. Then to his monks, he gives a message more of self-reliance rather than like kind of worshipping his remains. He said his last words to his monks are to say, you've got this quote, but basically, strive by yourself to get to enlightenment. You put the effort in, so it's all about self-reliance. So what's the message here? Well, obviously, it's really just linked to what I've just said. So the importance would be, one, it means that there's a justification for worshipping stupas. The Buddha himself recommended it. Number two, it's also another message in there would be that the Buddha also recommended self-reliance and people that we should focus on our own enlightenment. Arguments against this importance, we could say, well, the story is a bit confused because is the Buddha teaching people to rely on themselves or is he teaching people to worship stupas? Which one is it? They seem to slightly contradict each other, at least in emphasis. One is like, well, don't worry about what happened to my body or anything like that, or me. Focus on following the teachings and getting to enlightenment. And the other one seems to suggest, no, it's a really good thing to worship me and worship my remains. For some people, that's supposed to be a divide between lay people and monks. Monks try to get to enlightenment, but lay people should try to should worship the Buddha. But then in many other parts of the Pali Canon, the Buddha doesn't seem to make such a big distinction, and lay people can get to enlightenment and stuff. So there's a bit of confusion in that message, I think. Okay, so you should have filled that. There's quite a lot to write in there, but yeah, make sure you've got those details filled in. Okay, this is the essay that I want to look at. So the stuff that we've looked at just then kind of forms a background to this essay, and I suppose what's important to me is that in this essay there should be times when you can talk about particular parts of the Buddha's life. It won't be everywhere in the essay, but it shouldn't be the case that you're just talking purely about his life generally. It's really good to pick out parts that you can talk about, and I'll talk through how you might do this. So the question is, assess the importance of the life story of the Buddha for Buddhists today. So the question is basically, is the life story important for Buddhists, or is it not very important for Buddhists? Which one is true? Now, this is actually a question that we kind of looked at we did look at in GCSE, but there's more to it in this one than there would be at GCSE, but some of the basic arguments are the same. So look, these are the 3 perils I want you to write up. Don't want you to write them in full. I just want you to write a kind of plan of what you'd put in each place. I'm going to talk you through them, but it's up to you to write them up in more formally. So my first peril will be about Theravada Buddhist views. Now, what I'm going to do, the way I'm going to structure it is to give 3 reasons for each peril. I'm going to start with a reason why it's not important, and then reply with a reason why it is important. And overall, my conclusion in my essay is going to be that it is important overall. You can structure. I mean, if you want to structure it the same as me, that's fine. If you want to go a different direction, that's up to you. But this is how I would do it. So, Theravada Buddhist views. I would start with this quote: "He who sees Dharma sees me." So, to me, that quote. Of course, the Buddha wasn't talking when he said that. He wasn't talking about his life story because he was alive at the time. So he wasn't talking about his biography. He was talking about actually meeting and seeing him. But I think it can easily be applied to argue that the Buddha's life story is not important. Because what did he mean when he told this to Vikali? Well, what he meant was that if you were interested in him, the best way to take an interest in him is by following his teachings, not by going to see him or taking interest in his personal life as an individual. So that might make some Buddhists think, the Buddha's life story is not really that important, because really the Buddha's life story is about the most important thing about the Buddha is his Dharma and his teachings. And so if you were to give an option to read a book or go to a talk about the Dharma, or read a book or go to a talk about the Buddha's life, you should choose the Dharma over the life. So that would be the reason to say it's not important. On the other hand, what we could say is, but actually the point is that you can't separate the Dharma from the life story, because the importance of the life story is actually in that it helps you to understand the Dharma. Maybe it helps you to understand the Dharma in a more concrete way or in a more practical way, because it gives real life examples that help to illustrate the Dharma. That would be how I'd look at it. So for example, I'd pick out some example that can help you explain that. So I would go for here as my response. I'd say, so the response would be, the life story is important because it actually helps you to understand the Dharma. And the example I'd give is, if we look at the Buddha's early life and then his practice of asceticism, that really helps to illustrate the Buddhist teaching of the middle way. Because here we have a life that he lived in luxury, but he didn't find true and permanent happiness. Then he tried to starve himself. It didn't bring him true and permanent happiness. And so it taught him that the way to live is a middle way between overindulgence and harsh asceticism. And then you could link it and say, well, look, you can see that this is reflected in the life of Buddhist monks today. Buddhist monks today don't starve themselves, but neither do they eat all the time. They eat one substantial meal before noon, and then they don't eat for the rest of the day. So this shows that the life of the Buddha has a practical importance to the life of Buddhists today, that it helps to illustrate one of the most important teachings in Buddhism. Okay, secular Buddhist views. Again, I'm going to go for my perils. I'm going to go with why it's not important, then why it is important. So I would say, first of all, why is it not important? It's not important because a lot of the parts of the story cannot be believed by people today. secular Buddhists tend to be empiricists and materialists, and they don't believe in the supernatural. And there's some parts of the story for them will be unrealistic, unbelievable, and in many ways not relevant. So you could say that, for example, the birth story would be the most important. You'd say the birth story, they would say, is unrealistic, and these things are very unlikely to have happened. It's not possible that someone could walk 7 steps and then speak when they were born. That story's just not true. Even more so, they'd say, even more than that, if you focused on that part of the life story, focusing on it would actually lead you to concentrate on teachings in Buddhism which either are irrelevant and probably not true. So a secular Buddhist like Batchelor would say, look, the birth story focuses on karma and rebirth. Well, focusing on that will lead people to become interested in merit making, focused on their next life, when number one, the Buddha didn't really want people to be focused on merit making, and number two, karma and rebirth, according to secular Buddhists, aren't real things anyway. So these would be a reason to say that it's not important, and actually for them it could be damaging, harmful to focus on certain parts of the life story because they might lead people to focus on the wrong things. On the other hand, why can we say it is important? Well, the truth is that when secular Buddhists give talks and things, they do talk about the Buddha's life story, about parts of it at least. Because, as we've seen, the Buddha's life story is a good illustration of certain Buddhist teachings. So I'd go here for the four sites. I'd say so you could say, but in fact, whether they're true or not, and that's the important phrase I'd put in, for secular Buddhists, whether they're true or not, the stories from the Buddha's life story, at least some of them, provide a good illustration of key Buddhist teachings. So, for example, you could say that the four sites provide a good illustration of the Buddhist teachings of suffering. The fact that even for a rich, a powerful person like the Buddha, life has suffering within it because old age, sickness, and death mean that there's going to be suffering in everybody's life. Now, what you could develop that a little bit more. You could talk about different kinds of suffering, because to me, old age and sickness, that's dukkha dukkha, right? They're forms of dukkha dukkha. But you could say that death is forms a kind of viparinama dukkha, in the sense that for someone like the Buddha, whose life was full of luxury, you could say, well, the inevitability of death for the Buddha was actually signaling to him that the things that made him happy in his life were impermanent because they can't last forever. Now, again, to add detail to it from a secular Buddhist point of view, you might say that a secular Buddhist might not believe that story is 100% true. They might think that it's not true at all, or they certainly might think that it's an over-exaggeration. I doubt a secular Buddhist is going to believe that the Buddha lived till he was 20, in his late 20s or early 30s, without ever having seen an old man, a sick person, or a dead person. But the point is that doesn't really matter, because this question isn't assess whether the life story is true, it's assess the importance. And so a secular Buddhist might say, well, maybe it's not true, but it's still an important story because it really helps to quite clearly illustrate the teaching of suffering. Okay, third one, Pure Land Buddhists. And here we're going to move away from looking at particular parts of the Buddha's life story to look at a more general point. So for Pure Land Buddhists, assess the importance of the Buddha's life story. Well, the point would be that the Buddha's life story is of really very little importance to Pure Land Buddhists. And by the Buddha's life story here, this is the important thing. I mean, the life story of Siddhartha Gautama, the Buddha whose life story we have studied. They would say that the life story of that Buddha is not that important. Why? Because it's impossible to get. That Buddha taught people how to get to enlightenment on this earth, and it's impossible in the age of Mappo that they say we're living in now to get to enlightenment here and now in this earth. And therefore, the things that Buddha taught, obviously they would say that there are good teachings in Buddha's teachings, but in general, the things that Buddha taught and the things that he did which illustrate those teachings don't really benefit us that much in this life. What benefits us is the life story and the teachings of a different Buddha, and that is Amitabha, or Amida in Japanese. and so the focus should be on him. Yes, his life story, the fact that he was this monk called Dharmakara, and he made a vow that anybody who chanted that he wouldn't get to enlightenment, and he promised that if he got to enlightenment, once he got there, he would create this pure land, and everybody who called upon his name could be reborn there. That part of his life is important, but even more important is simply the teaching that if you call on the name of Amida, he will let you be reborn in the Pure Land. So it's that's important, not the life story of this Buddha born on Earth 2,500 years ago. How would you respond to that? Well, nice and easy way to respond from a Theravada point of view, and even from the point of view of, and that point of view will be supported by many historians. It can be argued that Pure Land Buddhism can be seen as inauthentically Buddhist. It's not really Buddhist. And so from that point of view, from Theravada point of view, when it says assess the importance of the life of the Buddha for Buddhists today, we could say, well, Pure Land shouldn't really be counted as Buddhist because they don't follow proper Buddhism. Why is it not proper Buddhism from a Theravada point of view? Because it's based on it's based on an idea like Mappa, which doesn't have a basis in the Buddhist scriptures. In addition, in the earliest Buddhist scriptures. In addition, it's based on Mahayana Sutras, which are not the teachings of the original Buddha, and from a Theravada point of view and from a historian's point of view, are actually just new teachings that were written a long time after the Buddha's life. The Buddha died. So you could say, yes, that Pure Land says that the life of the Buddha is not that important, but Pure Land shouldn't be counted when we're talking about what Buddhists believe. Okay, so see if you can write up the essay plan, and that will be all for today. Okay, thank you.